One of the biggest impacts the coronavirus pandemic has had is the effect on our economy. We're joined now by Tom Steyer, recently a candidate for President of the United States and now the Chief Advisor on Business and Jobs Recovery for California. Have questions for Tom? 916-321-3310. Mr. Steyer, we're glad to have you here. You were appointed by the governor to get things going again in California. You're a couple of 3 weeks into this. Where are we in a broad question?
Well, I think if you look at what's going on, we're moving into phase 2 tomorrow of a very deliberate, controlled effort by the governor to reopen the economy of California. And I think you have to give Governor Newsom really high marks for being decisive about this pandemic, for getting us into a good health situation very early and very consistently, being data-driven. And tomorrow we move into phase 2 to gradually and carefully reopen the economy, still putting health first, but getting Californians back to work.
In your mind, since you're heading an 80-person task force, this is like an all-star team. You have ex-governors, Bob Iger from Disney. Where do you see this going, and how long will it take us to get back to some semblance of normal?
Well, I don't think we have a known time frame here, Walt, because there are a lot of unknowns about how long it takes the medical community to come up with therapeutic solutions, how long it takes to come up with a vaccine. So we're a little bit in an unknown territory going forward. But what we can see is that the governor is using our task force, which includes business leaders and former governors, as you said, but also includes labor leaders and community activists, to make sure that his efforts to reopen the economy push us towards a more just California, a greener California, and the kind of forward-looking thinking that has always characterized this state, and that I think Governor Newsom has always bought into.
So for you and your group, once things get going and you're going to be assisting in all this, what will it look like? Jobs coming back? Will they be new jobs? Will things go back to the way they were? Or are you trying to create a new way of an economy?
Well, let me just start by saying this. We are about to get going. We've gotten going from day one, Walt. I mean, in reopening the economy gradually, the administration and the governor have had to come up with protocols, new ways of running these businesses that protect working people and also protect customers. And the task force has consulted and advised on all those protocols because they have experience and knowledge about how to run, for instance, retail stores, about what it looks like to be a home health care worker, so that when the administration is thinking about how to do this, they actually have a wealth of knowledge, which we've been, consistently bringing to bear on a daily basis, working very hard to make sure that those decisions are informed by the best information and the most experience.
Next question.
But let's say that
okay.
We started at X, California, in January of 2020. And then the pandemic hit. We've gone into this steep health emergency and economic free fall. And we are going to come back, and we're not trying to recreate January of 2020. What we're trying to do, and our mission statement is deliberate about this, is to create a more just, greener, forward-looking California. And we know that the impacts of this virus have hit disproportionately so-called essential workers, disproportionately Black and brown communities. And we want to make sure that we're putting those under-resourced communities at the forefront of our efforts, so that when we come out, we're not going back to January of 2020. We're going to try and come back to a better, more just, more sustainable California than has ever been before.
All right, that leads to the next question. You mentioned communities. What can you do to ensure recovery focuses on people, not business? Is it about people? Is it about business? Or is it the same thing?
Well, I think that, for instance, right now, we have to make sure we know, and a study came out a couple of days ago in Los Angeles to show the disproportionate impact of race, wealth, and place on the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic. And I think it's really important right now to make sure that we have testing available specifically in those communities, focused at the places where people are most likely to be essential workers, where they're most likely to be infected, and where the morbidity rates are the highest. So that's a first step. But I think it's very clear that going forward, what we can't do, Walt, we have to make sure we don't do what happened after the Great Recession, which is where so much of the support and the emergency money was funneled to the richest people. We've got to make sure that in this case, we take care of the people who are most disproportionately disadvantaged and hurt by this. Everybody's going to be hurt.
Okay.
This is a body blow.
All right.
But in fact, as we come out, we have to make sure that we do so in a way that makes us more equal, more equitable, more just. That's got to be at the forefront of our thinking as we talk about either the short run impacts, the medium term impacts, which we describe as between now and the end of 2020, and then the long run investments in our future. And we're breaking it down into those three time periods. And we have to make sure in all of those that we're addressing the inequality and making sure that the people who are bearing the brunt of this are in the forefront of our thinking.
Next question for you. Is the federal government doing enough to help states recover? And let's talk specifically to California. We've heard that the governor and the president are actually getting along.
Look, I think in a crisis, Walt, and this is clearly a health crisis and an economic crisis, you have to put aside partisanship. Every American life and livelihood is at risk. This is no time for fights between Democrats and Republicans. And this is no time for the federal government and the state governments to be feuding. You know, this is an all hands on deck moment. That's how the task force is treating it. That is exactly how Governor Newsom is treating it. He is trying to stand up for every single Californian and to make sure that we are coordinating and cooperating across the spectrum, including not just the federal government, but I think he's working very hard to make sure that we're as in sync as possible, but also with municipal and local governments. And I think that when you're in a crisis, you have to put aside all political interests and make sure that everybody is pulling on the same oar, which is to protect the lives of Americans and Californians and the livelihoods of Americans and Californians. And that's exactly what's happening here.
We're talking with Tom Steyer, California Task Force Chairman on Business and Jobs Recovery, tasked by the governor to get the state rolling again. Next question for you, Mr. Steyer. Where does the money to get the economy back open come from? Is this taxpayers who are going to end up paying for this? And all the money that's been used for stimulus, is that kicking the can down the road for our great-grandchildren?
Well, let me say that Governor Newsom is going to be addressing, he's going to have a budget update before May 14th by statute, and he will be addressing a lot of the questions that the listener just posed. But let me say this, that as we're going forward, I do think that it's sensible to think about this in the timeframes that I described, which is very, very short term between now and the end of the year, and then the investment long term in rebuilding California. And I think there's no question that at a time when there's going to be a real call for government spending and government investment, that it's going to be really important to think about how to finance that at a time when interest rates are very, very low. Not just how to finance it, but also to make sure that it serves the purposes that I described before, which is to make sure that we come out to a better California. We come out to a more just California, a more equitable California, a more sustainable California, and one that actually builds on our great strengths, which is we can have the best workforce in the world, the best people in the world, and we can have the best, our industries across the board can be driven by the best information technology so that they can compete successfully with anyone in the world. And if we take that attitude, and I think that's Governor Newsom's attitude for sure, then we can come out into a better place. As hard as this may be, as much pain as it's causing on a health basis, as much pain as it's causing economically, as worried as people are, that there is a brighter vision that we're pursuing that Governor Newsom is laying out. and that we're going to push for going forward.
Now, for you, you traveled the country running for president. You spent a lot of time in the Deep South, South Carolina, and other states, obviously. What did you learn about the country that you didn't know before that maybe you can apply to what you're doing today?
You know, Walt, it was a great opportunity for me to meet Americans across the country. It was a profound experience for me emotionally and intellectually. I loved meeting those people. I loved who they were. I loved learning their circumstances and allowing me to get a broader context of what's going on in the country, learning things that you can't learn in California because they don't exist here. But it really, you know, my experience running for president made me a better person, made me a more committed and religious person. I think grounded me in the goals that I have, which is to make sure that we create a future for all of us that really lives up to the values that I think of that are the most basically American in terms of freedom and equality and justice. And, you know, it was so meaningful for me meeting those people. And it's really, that spirit is what I think is animating this task force. I think that's that spirit that's animating our governor and our administration. And I think that that represents, you know, the best of America and the best of California. And I think this is a time when the cream is gonna rise to the top. We're gonna show up as a state and a country, really pushing forward and coming together. That's my profound, deep belief and hope.
Let me ask you this, Tom. What's going to lead us back economic-wise? Would you say it would be ag commodities? What would be the first thing, the biggest thing that's going to push us back in this state?
Well, you know, I think if you look at California's economy, we're so diverse. I mean, we're this huge agricultural economy. We're this huge information technology economy. We're this huge tourism economy. We're a huge manufacturing base. We're a gigantic entertainment base. And I've left out a ton of things. So we're going to come back together across the board. And I was trying to say earlier, but what I think is going to drive this across the board is our ability to make sure that we're doing it based on the best people in the world, the best trained, the best educated people in the world, ready to do the jobs of the 21st century. And that across the board, we're going to be the fastest, the most nimblest, and the most IT enabled. And across the board, if we pursue that, this state can outcompete anybody in the world.
Tom Steyer, the chairman of California's Task Force on Business and Jobs Recovery. Mr. Steyer, we do appreciate your time today. We know you're extremely busy with an 80-person task force, and we thank you for your time.
Walt, it's really great pleasure to be with you.
All right, thank you.
This interview involves commercial content. The products and services featured appear as paid advertising.